Jake Moore trudged through the forest park, hands shoved into the pockets of his worn denim jacket. Evening in Portland smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and the faint smoke of distant fireplaces. Street tilted along the path cast long shadows, their glow mingling with the dim light of the moon filtering through clouds. The workday at the insurance company had drained him. Endless spreadsheets, client calls mixing up names and details, and coffee from a machine that tasted like plastic. In ordinary life, Jake had grown used to it, like you get used to old sneakers and comfortable, but too much hassle to replace. But in recent weeks something had shifted, dreams, strange sticky ones like cobwebs, a dark void, a whisper in a language he didn't know, and the feeling that someone was watching him, not threatening but insistent. He was almost at the park's exit when he saw it. A shimmer, not bright like a street wide, not a reflection off a puddle. The air ahead quivered, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. Jake froze, squinting. Eyes are tired, he thought. After hours staring at a screen, no surprise there, but his feet were already carrying him toward the trees. Where the shimmer slipped into the thicket, as if someone were beckoning him, he stopped and listening. Silence, not silence, but a whisper, faint like wind rustling leaves, but alive, the same as in his dreams. No words, but it called to him, pulled at him like a magnet. Jake shook his head, snorted nonsense. He turned and headed home, to his one-bedroom apartment with a couch buried under unwashed t-shirts and a fridge holding last night's pizza. But all evening, he couldn't shake the thought that something in the woods had lingered. Something that knew his name. The next morning started as usual. Alarm, cold shower, toast with peanut butter. Jake stared out the window at Portland's gray sky, trying to convince himself that last night was just a trick of the light. But by evening, curiosity won out. He tossed a flashlight, smartphone, and water bottle into his backpack just in case and headed to the forest park. The sun was setting, painting the clouds crimson, and the air carried the scent of wet soil. The park was familiar. Jake used to jog here in the mornings, back when he believed he could become a better version of himself. Now he rarely came except to cut through on his way home. Tonight, the path seemed narrower, the pines taller, their branches weaving overhead as if hiding the sky. Jake ventured deeper toward where he'd seen the shimmer. Nothing. Just moss and roots jutting from the earth. He was about to turn back when the flashlight beam caught it. A circle, stones, each the size of a fist, lay perfectly even, forming a ring about 15 feet across. Jake froze. He knew for certain they hadn't been here before. Not last month, not last year. In the center, nothing, but the air above it wavered, like heat over fire. His smartphone buzzed in his pocket, the screen flickering, flashing black, then static. The flashlight blinked and died. Damn it, Jake muttered, smacking the flashlight. No luck. He pulled out his phone, but it wouldn't turn on either. Just a faint crackle, like an old radio. The whisper returned, louder, more urgent. Not words, but sounds woven into a melody that sent chills down his spine. It was eerie and captivating, like a song you heard once but can't recall. Jake glanced around. No one, just pines and shadows that moved. Though there was no breeze, leaves fell slowly as if in slow motion, hovering longer than they should. He wanted to leave, really wanted to. His heart pounded, palms sweaty, but his legs wouldn't move. Something pulled him toward the circle's center. Not fear, not curiosity, something deeper, something he couldn't name, as if a part of him already knew what was inside and had been waiting for it his whole life. He took a step closer. The air grew thicker. Like water. The whisper surrounded him, coming from all sides, sinking under his skin. The hair on his neck stood up, but there was no turning back. Jake took a deep breath and stepped into the center of the circle. The world vanished. No forest, no stones, no sky over Portland. Emptiness, not black, not white, just nothing. Where there was no up, no down, no time. Jake didn't feel his body, but he knew he was there. The whisper enveloped him, but it wasn't frightening anymore. It was familiar, like his mother's voice calling him to dinner, or the laugh of a friend he hadn't spoken to in years. Jake realized he wasn't alone. Something was with him. Not a person, not an animal, a presence. It didn't move, didn't speak, but it knew him. Knew how he'd hidden under the covers at 8, terrified of the dark. Knew how he'd dreamed of leaving Portland, seeing the world, but stayed because it was easier. Knew how he blamed himself for the fight with his dad before he passed the words he couldn't take back. Everything. Do you want to see? The question formed in his mind, but it wasn't his thought. The voice was soft but deep, like an echo in a cave. Jake didn't know what it meant. See what? But something inside him, the same part that drew him to the circle, already knew the answer. He nodded, or thought he nodded, and then it began. Images flooded him, like a river breaking a dam. Stars, billions, burning brighter than he could imagine, woven into patterns that felt alive. Cities of glass and light, where shadows sang and buildings breathed. Faces, thousands, millions, speaking languages he'd never heard. Their eyes met his, not with threat but with understanding, as if they'd been waiting for him. A sense of infinity washed over Jake. It was so vast he wanted to laugh and cry at once. He saw oceans that burned, deserts where metal flowers bloomed, skies where stars danced. But woven into this flood was his own life, like a thin thread. Moments when he'd been happy, a summer by the lake, his dad teaching him to fish, his mom's laughter as they decorated the Christmas tree. His first kiss with Kate in the back of an old Ford parked outside the movie theater, and moments he'd buried, the shouting match when he told his dad he hated him, days staring at the ceiling, hating himself for changing nothing, the fear he'd always be nobody. It was all there, like a book he didn't want to open but couldn't put down. Jake didn't know how long it lasted, a second, a year, forever, but he felt himself changing. Something inside him was growing or returning, as if he'd always been more than he thought, and only now was starting to see it. He opened his eyes. The forest park. Pines stood still. The moon hung overhead, same as before. The stones were gone, the whisper silent. Jake checked his phone. Just a few minutes had passed. He stood in the same spot, but everything felt different. The air smelled sharper, like after a storm. The stars above seemed closer, as if someone had wiped dust from the sky. Jake took a deep breath and walked home, not looking back. His steps were lighter, though he couldn't say why. At his apartment, he dropped his backpack on the floor and paused at the bathroom mirror. His face same but not quite. His eyes glowed, like someone had lit a spark in them. His smile was his and not his, too calm, too certain. He turned away, heart beating faster than it should. He collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. Sleep came quickly, but this time no whispers, just stars dancing behind his closed eyes. Morning felt ordinary, or should have. Jake got up, brewed coffee, threw on a shirt he hadn't ironed in ages, but the world had shifted. He noticed it walking to work. The smile of the barista, who he'd always thought was cold but now just looked tired. A song on the radio in the cab, making him want to dance, though he hadn't danced since prom. A man on the street who nodded, like they knew each other, though Jake was sure they'd never met. At the office, everything was the same: calls, spreadsheets, the smell of cheap cologne from Bob at the next desk. But Jake saw more. He saw Sarah, who always complained, sneak a glance at her phone, smiling at a text. He saw Bob fidget with his pen when he thought no one was looking. It was strange, but not scary. It felt right. The whisper came back that evening as he sat in a diner with a burger and a Coke. Not loud, more like a shadow of a thought. "Look over there," it said, and Jake turned, spotting an old woman who'd dropped her coins and was struggling to pick them up. He helped her, though he'd have walked by before. "Smile," the whisper urged, and Jake smiled at the waitress bringing his check. And she smiled back, for the first time in all his visits. "Don't be afraid," it said when he thought about calling his mom, who he hadn't spoken to in months. Jake didn't know what it was, a voice, instinct, or something he'd brought back from the circle, but it didn't scare him. It guided him. That evening he returned to the forest park, not to find the circle, but because he knew he had to be there. The paths led him, as if choosing the way themselves. No circle, just moss and pines. But Jake knew where to stand. He closed his eyes and warmth spread through his chest. Like an embrace from within, the whisper spoke one last time, soft, like a goodbye. "You're with us now." He opened his eyes and looked up. Above Portland, a star flickered brighter than the rest. too bright for a city that drowned the sky, or maybe it wasn't a star. Jake smiled, shoved his hands in his pockets, and walked home. His steps echoed louder than usual, but the forest was quiet. Only the stars watched him go.